Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everybody. And first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude, really, and honor to be here and thank Martin, Lauren, Andrea, and all the people who've organized this seminar, which I think is going to be very stimulating and enlightening. Just very briefly about my role. I am a pharmacist by training and background and have worked in medicines, information, and pediatric clinical pharmacy over the years. For the last, say, 15 years, I've been working as a freelancer. I quite like that word, actually. You know, it means all sorts of things. And really my focus has been for a long time in pediatric clinical pharmacy, a little bit along formulation. Tony and I go back quite a long way. In fact, it's quite interesting how we're all connected, isn't it? Because I can remember when struggling to find information on formulations and drug doses, going to the ABC book, which Tony described, and also the Sick Kids resources, which have been extremely useful over the years. So interest in pharmacy education, in also getting more and more interested in informatics as well, and that will probably come out in my presentation, which is not really so much about the content of the formulary. It's about how we adapted an existing resource, put it into the New Zealand context, and also added some value to that and really made it production ready, if you like, for some exciting things, including decision support. So first of all, just to again express gratitude to the sponsors, but to state that I don't have any conflicts of interest to declare, and make some acknowledgements as well. First of all, I have to acknowledge the British National Formulary for Children, which has been mentioned in several occasions so far, and we do know that this is a very widely used resource. And our starting point for the New Zealand Formulary was the BNFC. Also got to acknowledge a very talented team of people back in New Zealand who put together the New Zealand Formulary for Children in a very short period of time. It was actually 7 months from taking the base BNFC to creating the New Zealand Formulary for Children, which was a pretty impressive achievement. And also, of course, the organising committee and the sponsors. It's actually, I think, my second visit to Toronto, and that was the first visit was a number of years ago. And just a slight aside, I guess, is that there is quite a strong connection, obviously, between Canada and New Zealand. Canada is quite high profile in New Zealand at the moment because, as some of you may realize, we're thinking about changing our flag. Big debate going on here. People have said, can we not have something like the Canadian flag? It's so immediately recognizable. The problem with the New Zealand flag is that people get it confused with the Australian one, which really irks New Zealanders, as you can imagine. So here's a quiz. Who can tell me the difference between the New Zealand flag and the Australian flag? I think you got primed there, Michael, yeah?
Well, I mean, this is, to be fair, I worked in New Zealand. So
right.
A different number of stars and they're a different color.
Yes, okay. White stars on the Australian one, red on the New Zealand one. Okay, thank you. So an outline to the presentation, a little bit of a background to the project, and excuse if I keep an eye on the clock because I want to leave time for Martin. And a background to the project, and then an overview really of how the New Zealand Formulary for Children was created. And I think the way I'd like to present this really is a model of what can be done in different settings. I've called the next bit special features. There are, I guess, enhancements that we incorporated into the product, and I'll explain how those can be used in different settings as well, and also to look at what's next. When you develop a resource like this, and there's been a significant degree of innovation, there's always, what do we do next? What do we have the opportunity to create next with the product that we've got? The youngest member of our editorial team. This was actually the only hard copy of the father, if you like, of the New Zealand Formulary, which is the New Zealand Formulary for Children, which was the New Zealand Formulary, based on the BNF, of course. And we were funded initially to prepare a New Zealand Formulary based on the BNF, and then to create the New Zealand Formulary for Children. The funding only covered digital versions, and so no books, apart from this one, which was a special edition. And of course, young Edmund here is musing through this publication thinking, when is the children's formulary going to come along? Well, it came along just on 2 years ago. And as I've said, the starting point for the NZFC was the highly reputable BNFC. And of course, we have to pay a license fee for that. We don't get the contents of the BNFC for free. So that's part of the deal, is we license the content and are then able to adapt it to our particular situation in New Zealand. I do have an internet connection here, and I can actually go into the live version of the NZFC. It is not available outside New Zealand. It's IP blocked, and that's part of the licensing agreement with the BNFC, so it's only available within New Zealand. Interestingly, it's actually open access, so the general public can get into the New Zealand Formulary for Children as well, which is opening up a lot of opportunities for us to actually create caregiver, parent information within the formulary as well, and we're working on that as a development. So how on earth do you go about, adapting a local country-based formulary based on the BNFC? What are the main things that we have to consider? Well, as I said, the BNFC was the starting point, but we had to consider local context. And that local context was a whole spectrum, if you like, of considerations ranging from simple things like which drugs are available. Generally speaking, we don't have the range of drugs available in New Zealand that we have in the UK. We certainly don't have the range of pediatric formulations, liquid formulations that we have in Europe and the UK. As you're aware, the BNFC has not just drug monographs, but, I guess some basic treatment guidance as well, or general sort of pharmacological information. So we had to get our specialist pediatricians, specialist practitioners to review that content and put it in the context of practice within New Zealand. Where it was useful, we had to check the information against the data sheets. Data sheets, I guess, would be, the SPC or whatever they're called in Canada, the regulatory sheets that come with the medicines. So where there was pediatric focused information in those sheets, we had to check that against UK-based information, because I guess as people realize, there are often differences between indications and doses between countries. So that was one important thing to check. We identified, and I guess it was fairly sort of hit and miss, but we were aware of a range of what we called problem drugs, for which there was ongoing debate about what is the best dosage regimen, what is the best way to express the dosages, even things like, how do you express doses of coimoxiclav, what are the infusion rates of various drugs. We knew these practices varied, even within New Zealand. So we really used as our sounding board the major pediatric hospital in New Zealand, which is rather poetically named Starship Hospital, which the kids love apparently. And they were the major pediatric hospital, so they were our sort of reference board in these sort of situations. We had expert review of clinical sections, and we did that in a short period of time. And the trick there was to have a relatively small group of people. The bigger the group, the longer it takes. Funny, that. So the big thing really, I suppose, is doses. If you ever look at trying to standardize, information about drugs, probably one of the most challenging areas would be drug doses, especially in the area of pediatrics when there's, an incredible amount of variation in some respects. So our decision really was to start with the doses in our base publication, the BNFC. This was our reputable starting point. We identified this priority risk of problem drugs, as I mentioned. Morphine was on there, a lot of variation in how morphine is actually dosed. So that was sort of underpinned by the philosophy of, if we get this information out there, even if people have some different viewpoints on the doses presented in the NZFC, based predominantly on the BNFC, because we publish this digitally and we update it monthly, we've got a very good opportunity to take in feedback, to actually take in suggestions and generate a sort of ongoing live document. So that was the philosophy we took. We reformatted a lot of the way in which information was presented. One of the debates that seems to be ongoing, and I don't know if it's the same in Canada, is what is the best dosage regimen for amiodarone. So when we put out the NZFC, the dosage was based on BNFC, UK practices, and we got some feedback from Starship Hospital and various other people saying, we don't do it that way. So then we said, well, how do you do it, and where is the evidence? And actually nobody replied. So, you know, it's one of those areas where it stimulates debate, and it's interesting when you actually ask for evidence. The evidence sometimes isn't necessarily forthcoming. It doesn't mean to say that it's actually not good practice, but I think it actually really hammers home the point of some of the difficulties in getting standardized information. So at the moment we're sticking to the dose within the BNFC, but as you notice, the top left-hand side of the screen, I guess it's a bit of an out, you know, but we do know that local protocols exist. And one of the, you know, the work streams that we're working on, I guess, over the next year or so will be to trying to get those groups together to come up with a consensus with these tricky drugs. An important consideration within the NZFC and approval status, if you read that as being the licensing status for the drug, we thought it was very important that I'm not sure whether the prescribers necessarily think it's important, but to give an indication of the approval status of the medicine as per the licensed data sheet or whatever. So indicating whether the drug was licensed in children, what indications it's actually licensed for, any provisos around that. So, you know, we weren't aware of any other collective database of that information within New Zealand. It was very difficult for practitioners without actually going to the rather wordy, extensive data sheet to find out whether what restrictions there were on using that medicine in children. And of course, this doesn't prevent use in children, but it gives that information about the licensing status of that medicine. So you can see that we've got quite a bit of information for omeprazole, giving that detail about age groups and particular indications. Fluoxetine is rather simple and straightforward, but we do have a pediatric dose for fluoxetine in the monographs. So that information we have to keep tabs on, but we think it's actually useful for the prescribers. Amlodipine, you know, if it's not approved for use in children, we make that statement, but we still give the doses which are based on those best practice elements. One aspect that we thought is important to include in the formulary, and we followed BNFC lead on this, but we're currently looking at extending various areas. One area I think that we're all familiar with as being a potential cause, actually a cause of medication errors and adverse events or administration problems. We've started to introduce administration information regarding oral dose forms. We're including more and more intravenous protocols in there as well to get standardization. And of course, the reason we couldn't take from the parenteral perspective the information directly from the BNFC is because the brands are different, reconstitution information is different as well, so we had to customize that. So here we go with some special features. This is where I get a bit excited. We built this, the New Zealand Formulary. It's not just a text-based document. It's not just well, you see a website when you see it, but underneath is a very sophisticated content management system, which is data-driven. And it's based on, in fact, the chain of events, if you like, on the whole funding of the national formulary was that the New Zealand government several years ago set up a medicines terminology. You have the same in Canada based on SNOMED CT, a medicines terminology which every drug and every dose form of every drug is actually given a coding system. That is underneath the bonnet, or the hood, maybe you call it here, of the New Zealand formulary. It's data-rich, and it allows a lot of potential for linking in additional information and driving clinical decision support. So the things I'll briefly talk about are an integrated drug interaction checker, a standard set of standard batch sheets for compounding. Not really necessarily a data-driven element here, but there's been some discussion, already this morning about the problems with different formulas being done in different settings and the problems that can occur, that can cause with errors. So we had a program within New Zealand over the last 3 years in actually getting standard batch sheets, and we can link those from the formulary as well. We've got care advice leaflets. I'll talk about reference data and also the linkage to the medicines terminology and what that can offer. So just briefly, and what I will do if I have a few minutes at the end is I have the website open so I can go into a live demo just to show you that it really does exist rather than screenshots. So with this data linkage element and with this underpinning data, it means that we can, anything that we can map on a one-to-one coding basis with the New Zealand medicines terminology, we can actually integrate within the NZFC. So Stockley's drug interactions, I guess a lot of people will be familiar with that. There's also many other facilities like Lexi drug interactions and Hampstead and Horn. They're all available digitally. They all use a coding system. So it's a relatively simple job to map on a one-to-one basis the SNOMED coding within the New Zealand formulary with any data set. And then you can drive interactive facilities through the formulary. So within our drug monographs, it's easy for people to click on a link and find out the important interactions of that particular drug, and you'll see on this, it's actually adapted from Stockley's alerts. So it gives, a graded warding system for the interactions for that drug. But also you can add drugs into that checkbox there, and you can actually do a drug interaction, a drug, or a drug, or as many as you want, interaction check within that box, within the formulary as it exists. So we say this is powered by Stockley's. We have, as I said, we had this program to standardize formulation batch sheets for the very reasons that have been discussed, to try and get standard formulations, to reduce errors, to get everybody making these products as far as possible to the same formula. So we link to those. Well, that opens up as a PDF, so this is exactly what happens within the NZFC, is when a pharmacist actually wants to compound a product. So this could be a patient, child moving from primary to secondary care. The community pharmacist can look at the standard formulation for that product. The next thing, well, this is a relatively recent addition. And Tony mentioned Medicines for Children, which is, no, I don't have the website. Medicines for Children UK has produced an excellent series of parent, caregiver, or let's say patient information leaflets for children. They're child-focused. They have, I think, around 400 or 500 of these, quite an extensive list. So we then approached this organization in the UK, and they gave us permission we could brand these for New Zealand, and we can link them from the monographs within the NZFC. So we've got a lot of potential there for linkages. Just hopefully this will open up. So again, within the formulary, you're looking at the carbamazepine monograph, and you can actually link to the leaflet, and you see we've got our nice little logo at the top there, and various sort of permissions around this arrangement, but it's a very, a very productive arrangement, we think. It's working very well. Reference data. Well, this is where another example of where we went, in this case, over to Australia and said that we found that the information in the BNFC for breastfeeding and pregnancy was not really what we wanted from a practical point of view. We found an excellent data set for drugs in breastfeeding from the Therapeutic Guidelines group in Melbourne. So we approached those, and again, programmatically, we can link this information from the monograph. So people go to the monograph, look at breastfeeding, and they get the information, in this case, compatible, and this is the category of information. So this is, another example of taking an external data set and incorporating into this, I guess I use the cliche, the one-stop shop. I don't know if I particularly like that, but it seems to work, that people go to the resource and they can link to information as required. Right, the linkage to the medicine's terminology. Now this is really sort of presenting us and getting us ready for integration into patient management systems and integrated decision support. And I'll show you this live actually in a minute, but what we have at the base of every monograph is, again, this does not have to be done manually now by a group of people poring over a computer and matching codes. Does once, we do it once, and we set up that mapping system between the SNOMED codes for the drugs in the NZF, link it to the medicine's terminology, and that automatically brings through the product catalog, the products available, the dose forms, the drug data sheets, the cautionary advisory label information that the pharmacists use, the funding status, the subsidy status, the pricing, anything you want that people find useful associated with that drug, you can then link programmatically to the system. It's built on the, it's rather strange terminology, the New Zealand Universal. I mean, New Zealand isn't the center of the universe, but whoever dreamt of this terminology thought that maybe it was. So this is the New Zealand Universal List of Medicines, which is that drug catalog of codes, and that enables us to link in. That is actually mapped to the regulator's information, so it gives you that stream of information to follow through. So the NZFC is data as well as text, and as I said, all drug monographs coded with the medicine's terminology and can be mapped to that reference data. One of our current projects is of course to, within the fields of the monograph, so indications and contraindications, we have terms like contraindicated in epilepsy or indicated for heart failure. Those are all terms that can be coded. So we're starting by coding contraindications. The idea there, of course, is that those can be mapped to ICD-10 codes within diagnostic coding within the hospital records. So it gives you a whole range of possibilities from the point of view of decision support. When the NZFC is fully integrated with systems, you can do that sort of mapping and decision support activities. There are also projects underway to look at coding doses and coding, for example, high-profile drugs that may have a ceiling dose, which is, exceeding that ceiling dose might be associated with significant error and toxicity. So there's a lot to go on this, obviously, but having that building block of having a data-enabled formulary does allow these possibilities to be explored. I need to sort of quickly mention also that there's an awful lot of work goes in. We do a monthly release of this product. We update, a lot of it is programmatic updating of new products available. There is editorial work and clinical updating to be done. So we have a very talented editorial team. We have external expert advisors of pediatricians, specialist nurse practitioners, pharmacists, the whole team involved. And, we have to have our handle on how the workflow is actually controlled as well. And we currently use an open source, maybe a lot of people are aware of this, for project management called Trello, and it sort of helps us organize things. The content management system took about 6 months to develop, and it's a very, very sophisticated tool, if you like. So this is how we organize our work. We use Trello. It's very, very simple to use, but a very good organizational tool to plan, and we try and plan ahead, on a 6-month sort of review cycle, the work ahead. The content management system, unfortunately, I couldn't actually open it up and let you see underneath it because I can't get into it from here. But you can see down the right-hand side, we've got the editorial control, when changes were made. We can actually do differentials between versions, so we can find out when information was changed, by whom it was changed, and why it was changed. And then underneath this, of course, is the data elements that can be put in as well. So what about the next steps? Well, I think I've mentioned, quite a few, but we're certainly working quite furiously, I suppose, because it's actually part of it's interesting, one of the contractual deliverables, as far as the Ministry of Health in New Zealand was concerned, was to, make this available to do indication and contraindication checking, make it available to do dose range checking, make it available, to do allergy and hypersensitivity checking. Well, that's fine, but we didn't have any sort of rules to go by. We had the theory, but none of the underpinning justification. For example, nobody knows where to set the bar with these sort of warnings. You can over-alert and you can do too much. I think our job really at this stage is to develop the technology to allow this to happen and then work through sort of process to actually find out what is the most clinically significant use of this facility. Actually, one of my really sort of subset areas of interest is looking at drug, let's say, allergy, hypersensitivity. And again, interesting, as a deliverable, we have to create our own allergy and hypersensitivity drug sets. And when this project came along, I sort of I think, surely somebody's done this. Surely there's an open source set of allergy sets, or where you can actually just look at common cross-reactivity, plug those into a database, and hey, what have you got? Of course, the commercial groups, the Lexian people have that, but it's not transparent. You can't necessarily see why alerts are firing in this context. So, I didn't find it. Even, WHO, Uppsala Monitoring Center, you would think have this, they actually don't. So we're actually now working on quite a big project, which is actually collaborating with a group in Denmark who are looking at anybody's familiar with SNOMED CT, the medicine's terminology, is actually looking at that and trying to adapt that into an open source data set for drug allergy checking, which is going to be really useful for us because we're not going to pay $1 million to Lexi to give us the data set. We're probably going to spend $1 million ourselves. But, this, I think, is a very, very useful exercise to do. Integration with patient management systems, that's well underway. So that's also dispensing systems within pharmacies, systems for prescribing within GP practices and within secondary care as well. We've had requests. The neonatologists are a very special group, and they want a very special formulary. So, I guess they've identified within the NZFC that it doesn't quite cover some of the finer points of neonatal drug dosing, especially administration and dosing techniques. So there's a proposal in at the moment to actually develop more specific neonatal information within the NZFC. And also, probably on the back of some of the research that has been carried out with Martin and Lauren's group on looking at the ideal characteristics of a drug monograph, to develop extra fields of information that people find useful for when they're using the medicine's formulary. And finally, it's not just a sort of methodical production of a product. What we have done and what we've found in developing this project is the immense opportunities for research and development. A lot of things that we're thinking of all the time, from the point of view of innovations, which enrich the whole experience, and also, having the opportunity to come here and find out what people are doing in Canada. Let's face it, we can all work, the international communities, easy to connect these days, and we can draw in these ideas collectively to end up with a continually improved product, and that's very exciting also. And that's my talk, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you, and I hand over to Martin now.